I stood at the entrance of the gym, watching her. My hands clenched into fists as I saw the way she looked at him. Eyes bright, laser-focused on every move he made like he was the only thing that existed in the room. It was the same look she used to give me, the one that made me feel like I was the center of her world. Now it was directed at someone else, and the knot in my stomach tightened. We were supposed to be here to relax. A weekend getaway at this luxurious spa hotel was meant to bring us closer together. Things had been tense between us lately, long work hours, barely talking at home. I thought this trip would help us reconnect like it used to be. But from the moment we checked in and she spotted him, something shifted. Mason, the fitness trainer. Tall, muscular, with a smile that made half the women in the hotel whisper. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone checks out someone attractive from time to time, right? But the way her face lit up when he walked into the room wasn't something I could just brush off. The first day, she casually mentioned how great Mason's workout sessions were. I nodded, not really paying attention. But as the weekend went on, it became clear that her interest in fitness had suddenly skyrocketed, and not for the sake of staying healthy. She started disappearing to the gym for hours at a time, telling me she needed some space. Every time I suggested we do something together, she had an excuse. I just need to unwind, Adam, she said, her voice almost too sweet. I didn't want to push, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then came the moment that confirmed my worst fears. Yesterday, after my massage session, I decided to surprise her by joining her by the pool. As I walked towards the loungers, there they were, her hand lightly resting on his shoulder, both of them laughing like they were sharing some private joke. She didn't even notice me standing there, frozen in place. That was when the anger started bubbling up inside me. I couldn't believe it, my own wife. Flirting so openly with this guy, while I was just a few feet away. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to me this weekend alone? Later that evening, I overheard some women in the lobby gossiping about Mason. He's got a reputation, you know, one of them said. Flirts with all the wives, but never gets caught. They just fall for him, like moths to a flame. My blood boiled. It was clear now. She wasn't just interested in the workouts, she was interested in him. And it wasn't going to stop unless I did something about it. I knew exactly what I needed to do. If she thought she could get away with this without facing the consequences, she was wrong. Tomorrow, I'd make sure the whole hotel knew exactly what was going on between them. This wasn't going to end quietly. Not for her. Not for him. The anger that simmered inside me all night boiled over into the next morning. I had hardly slept. I kept running through yesterday's scene at the pool, replaying her laughter. And the way her hand rested on his shoulder like it belonged there. The betrayal was like a weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating. I had to do something. I couldn't just let this go. She thought she was in control, thought I wouldn't notice, or worse, that I wouldn't care. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her make a fool out of me. And as for Mason, he had no idea who he was messing with. At breakfast, I watched her, acting like nothing was wrong. She smiled and talked about going for another solo workout later in the day. My hands gripped my coffee mug tighter. She was too comfortable, too confident in the lie she was living. That's when I knew, if I wanted to make this right, I had to hit her where it hurt. I've been thinking, I said, cutting through her chatter. Why don't we do something together today? You've been spending so much time at the gym. How about I join you for one of Mason's sessions? The surprise in her eyes was unmistakable. Her smile faltered, and for a split second, she looked almost panicked. Oh, I didn't think you'd be interested. It's really intense, Adam. You might not like it. I forced a smile. I could use a challenge. Besides, I'd love to see what's been keeping you so busy. She hesitated, then nodded. All right, if you really want to. I could feel the tension rising between us as the day went on. I kept imagining how she must be dreading me joining her session. I'd be there, watching. She couldn't hide. But what she didn't know was that I had much bigger plans than just showing up. Later that afternoon, as she headed to the spa, I made my way to the gym early. I had a few things to prepare before the class began. Mason was there, getting the equipment ready, his usual charming grin plastered across his face. He didn't even notice me at first, too caught up in his own world. Typical. When he finally looked up, I could see the brief flash of recognition, and maybe a little wariness. He knew who I was. He just didn't know what I was about to do. Hey, you here for the class? he asked, his tone too casual. Yeah, I replied, barely able to keep the edge out of my voice. Figured I'd see what all the fuss is about. Great, Mason said, smiling wider. It's gonna be a tough one. Hope you're ready. I nodded, but inside, I was already planning the moment. The moment when I'd call him out in front of everyone. The moment where I'd expose him, and her. The other guests began filtering in, laughing, stretching, completely unaware of the storm brewing. And then she walked in. Eliza. She froze when she saw me standing there, a slight frown creasing her forehead. She hadn't expected me to show up early. Ready for this? I asked, my voice calm, betraying nothing of what I was feeling inside. Yeah, sure, she mumbled, glancing nervously between me and Mason. The class started, and I forced myself to focus. For a while, it was just like any other workout, squats, lunges, all the usual stuff. But every time Mason walked by her, every time he offered a helpful adjustment, I saw the way she responded. The way her body leaned just a little too close, the way her smile brightened when he looked at her. And that's when I knew the moment had come. Just as the session was reaching its peak, I saw my opportunity. Mason called for a group stretch, positioning himself right in front of us. The room was buzzing with energy, everyone was exhausted but exhilarated. That's when I stepped forward, raising my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Hey, Mason, I said, my tone cutting through the chatter. I just have one question. He looked over at me, his expression still cocky, unaware of what was coming. Sure, man, what's up? I turned to face the crowd, making sure they were all watching, then back to him, locking eyes with Eliza. Did she mention that she's married? The room went dead silent. Eliza's face drained of color, her eyes wide in shock. Mason blinked, clearly caught off guard, struggling to find the words. The guests, who had been so caught up in the workout, were now frozen, staring at the three of us. The truth was out now, hanging in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. For a moment, it was like time stopped. The entire gym went silent, everyone frozen in place. Eliza stood there, her face pale, eyes wide, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Mason's cocky grin faded, replaced by confusion, then panic. He opened his mouth, trying to regain control of the situation. I didn't, he stammered, looking around like he was searching for an escape. I wasn't going to let him off that easy. I stepped forward, my voice cold, cutting through the tension like a knife. What's the matter, Mason? You didn't know she had a husband? My gaze shifted to Eliza, who was still frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. Or maybe you just didn't care. The murmurs started. A couple in the back exchanged glances, whispers spread through the group like wildfire. Eliza's eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but there was nowhere to hide. She was trapped, just like Mason. I can explain, she finally stammered, her voice shaking. I turned to her, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of pity. But the anger, the betrayal, it was all too fresh, too raw. Go ahead, I said, my voice hard. Explain to everyone here how you've been spending all your workout time with him. She swallowed hard, but the words wouldn't come. I could see her struggling to piece together an excuse, but there was nothing she could say that would make this better. Not now. Not after everything. Mason, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, stepped forward. Look, man, I didn't know. I cut him off before he could finish. Save it. I heard about you. I know your reputation around here. Do you think you can charm every woman who walks through this place? Well, this time, you picked the wrong one. The gym was dead silent again. All eyes were on us. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, some shocked, some uncomfortable, but no one looked away. The reality of the situation was sinking in for them too. Mason took a step back, clearly rattled, but he tried to put on a brave face. Look, I'm just a trainer. I wasn't trying to. Weren't trying to what? I snapped, cutting him off. Weren't trying to flirt with my wife right in front of me? Weren't trying to act like you had no idea she was married? Please. Eliza finally spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. Adam, it's not what you think. I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Not what I think. Eliza, I saw you. At the pool. The way you've been talking about him. The way you've been acting around him. How stupid do you think I am? Her lip quivered, but she said nothing. There was nothing she could say that would undo the damage. Mason, sensing there was no way to talk himself out of this, shifted uncomfortably. Look, I think we should all just. I shook my head. No, Mason. You don't get to walk away from this. Not this time. The tension in the room was unbearable. Thick enough to choke on. I could feel the eyes of the other guests, all of them waiting to see what would happen next. Eliza, finally snapping out of her stupor, took a step toward me, her voice pleading. Adam, please, let's go somewhere and talk about this. We can work it out. But it was too late for that. The hurt, the betrayal, it was too deep now. I couldn't just walk away and pretend like this didn't happen. Talk about what, Eliza? I said, my voice cold. About how you've been lying to me this whole time. About how you've been sneaking around with him. What's left to say? She looked down at the floor, tears welling up in her eyes. But I couldn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. I turned away, the weight of the situation finally hitting me. The crowd had seen enough. They were already whispering, already drawing their own conclusions. The humiliation, the betrayal, it was all too public now. There was no coming back from this. I took one last look at Mason, who stood there, shoulders slumped, looking as defeated as Eliza. I hope this was worth it, I said, my voice low but firm. Without waiting for a response, I walked toward the door, leaving the mess behind me. As I stepped out into the fresh air, the weight on my chest didn't lift like I thought it would. Instead, a hollow emptiness settled in its place. I had exposed them and made them face the truth, but it didn't feel like victory. The damage was done, and now there was nothing left to save. As I walked away from the gym, from the hotel, from everything we once had, I knew one thing for certain, this was the end. And there was no going back. I walked out of the hotel without looking back, my footsteps heavy against the pavement. The evening air was cool, but it did little to calm the fire raging inside me. My mind raced, my thoughts scattered. I wanted to scream, to hit something, anything to release the pressure building in my chest. But I kept walking, my hands trembling at my sides. I didn't know where I was going at first, just away from there. I needed distance and space to think. By the time I reached the parking lot, my vision was blurred, not with tears, but with a rage I hadn't felt in years. I got into the car, slammed the door shut, and gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at nothing. The hotel loomed in the rearview mirror, the scene of the worst humiliation I'd ever experienced. Eliza's face flashed in my mind, pale, desperate, trying to explain the inexplicable. And Mason, standing there, cornered, still trying to save face even though we all knew the truth. I had exposed them. I made sure everyone knew what was going on. But as I sat there, I couldn't help but feel empty. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life. The sound was a welcome distraction from the storm inside my head. Without thinking, I pulled out of the lot and drove. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to move, to get away from that place, from her. The road stretched out before me, dark and winding, taking me further and further from the hotel. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt almost hypnotic. But no matter how far I went, the weight of what had happened followed me, pressing down harder with every mile. I tried to process everything, but it was like trying to piece together a shattered mirror. Every time I thought I had a handle on it, another sharp edge would cut through, reminding me of what I'd lost. How had we gotten here? How had Eliza, the woman I'd shared my life with for years, fallen for someone like Mason? I didn't have the answers. Maybe I never would. All I knew was that the woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And there was no fixing that. Not now. Eventually, the adrenaline that had been driving me wore off, leaving me exhausted and emotionally drained. I pulled off the highway, found a quiet parking lot near a gas station, and parked the car. The silence was deafening, but I needed it. I needed to sit in it, to let it wash over me. As I leaned back in the seat, staring at the ceiling of the car, one thought kept circling in my mind: what happens now? There was no easy answer. But one thing was certain, I couldn't go back. Not to her. Not to the life we had before. Too much had changed. I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would come. But all I could see was her face and the way she'd looked at Mason. Morning sunlight seeped through the windshield, waking me from a restless sleep. I blinked, disoriented for a moment. The events of the previous night crashing back into my consciousness. My body ached from sleeping in the car, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional wreckage still swirling inside me. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and checked my phone. Dozens of missed calls and texts from Eliza. I scrolled through them, all variations of the same desperate plea. Adam, please come back. We need to talk. I can explain. Explain? Explain what? There was nothing to explain. I had seen everything I needed to see. Her betrayal wasn't something she could talk her way out of. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, unwilling to engage with her just yet. I couldn't face it. Not now. Not after everything. The truth was, I didn't know how to move forward. Every instinct in me wanted to confront her, to yell, to demand answers, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage had been done. Confronting her would just be reliving the same nightmare. I stepped out of the car, stretching my sore muscles, and wandered into the gas station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I grabbed a cup of coffee. The bitterness of the drink matched my mood perfectly. As I stood there, staring at the black liquid swirling in my cup, I realized something. I had spent the entire night running away from her, but I hadn't really thought about what I wanted. For the first time, I forced myself to face it. What did I want? I didn't want to hear her excuses, that was for sure. I didn't want to go back to the way things were, pretending nothing had happened, but I also wasn't ready to make any final decisions. The thought of divorce hung in the air, but it felt too big, too final, to make that call in the fog of anger. The question hung over me like a cloud. Do I stay, or do I leave for good? By the time I returned to the car, the silence inside was suffocating. I grabbed my phone again, reading through more of Eliza's texts. She sounded frantic, begging for another chance to explain, to fix things. But each message only pushed me further away. I started to drive again, but this time, I knew where I was going. I needed to see her one last time, if only to get some kind of closure. Not for her, for me. The hotel loomed in the distance as I pulled back into the parking lot. My chest tightened as I parked the car. I took a deep breath and forced myself to get out. The last thing I wanted was another scene, but I needed to hear her out. If only to confirm that what we had was truly over. As I made my way to our room, I steeled myself for whatever was waiting. I had no idea what she would say, and frankly, I didn't care. But this conversation, this final confrontation, was something I couldn't avoid any longer. The door was slightly ajar, as if she had been waiting for me. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, her face streaked with tears. She looked up at me, eyes red and puffy, but I could see the fear behind them. Adam, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I stood there, silent, waiting for her to continue. The weight of her words hung in the air, but they did nothing to ease the anger, the hurt. There was no going back. I don't know what I was thinking, she sobbed, her hands shaking. It was stupid, a mistake, but I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Adam. Love. The word felt hollow, empty. It used to mean something. Now, it felt like a lie. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Eliza, I didn't come here to fix this. I just came to hear you out. But whatever you say, it's not going to change what happened. Her face crumpled as the truth hit her. There was nothing left to salvage. Her sobs filled the room, each one cutting into the silence like a jagged knife. Eliza sat there, her shoulders trembling, waiting for me to say something, anything, that would change what we both knew. But I had nothing left to offer. She looked up at me, eyes red and swollen from crying. Adam, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can work through this. We can fix it, can't we? You and me, we've been through so much together. I wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to hold on to the hope that maybe, somehow, we could go back to the way things were. But that part of me had been dying ever since I saw her with Mason. The trust was broken, shattered beyond repair. The woman in front of me wasn't the same person I had married. And I wasn't the same person either. Eliza, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't something we can just work through. You didn't just hurt me. You lied to me. You broke something between us that can't be fixed. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't real, Adam. It wasn't. It was stupid, and it didn't mean anything. Mason was just, she paused, searching for the words as if anything she said now could make a difference. He was just a distraction. I never stopped loving you. Her words felt like empty promises, a desperate attempt to cling to something that was already gone. I wanted to ask her why. Why Mason? Why the lies? Why risk everything we had built together for something so meaningless? But I didn't need the answers anymore. They wouldn't change what had happened. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said, my voice quieter now. And without trust, what do we have left? Eliza's sobs grew quieter, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Please, Adam, she whispered. Don't leave me. We can make this right. We can go to therapy. Talk to someone, anything. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words and the desperation in her voice. But deep down, I knew I had already made my decision. Even if we went to therapy, even if she promised to change, that broken trust would always be there, lurking in the background, poisoning every interaction, every conversation. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I deserve better than this. The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. I could see the moment they sank in, the moment she realized there was no going back. Her face crumpled again, and she let out a choked sob, but I didn't reach for her. I didn't try to comfort her. I couldn't. I'm going to pack my things, I said, stepping toward the door. Adam, she began, but I didn't stop. I couldn't listen to more apologies. I had heard enough. I walked out of the room and into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The weight that had been pressing down on me since I caught her with Mason was starting to lift. It wasn't gone yet, but the first step had been taken. As I packed my things, I felt a strange sense of relief. This chapter, this painful, gut-wrenching chapter, was ending. And no matter what came next, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let her define my future. The drive back home was different this time. The anger, the adrenaline that had fueled me before, had faded. In its place was a quiet numbness, the kind that sets in after a storm has passed. My mind felt clearer, but also heavier, weighed down by the reality of what had just happened. I didn't feel victorious. There was no sense of triumph in walking away from Eliza. In the end, we both lost. The life we had built, the years we had spent together, the memories we had made, it was all tainted now. What had once been a source of joy and stability was now a reminder of betrayal. But as the miles passed, I realized something: I wasn't as broken as I thought I'd be. Yes, the pain was still there, raw and unrelenting, but I wasn't destroyed. I wasn't the same man I was yesterday or even the day before, but I was still standing. And that counted for something. I pulled into the driveway of my house. It felt strange to think of it that way now. This place had been our home, filled with laughter and love, and now it was just a shell, holding memories that no longer made sense. I got out of the car and walked inside, the silence of the house greeting me like an old friend. The emptiness wasn't comforting, but it was honest. And I could live with that. I dropped my bags in the hallway and sank down onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The enormity of what had just happened settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had just walked away from my marriage, from the life I thought I wanted. I couldn't help but wonder what Eliza was doing now. Was she still sitting on the bed in that hotel room, crying? Or had she finally accepted what we both knew, that this was over? I didn't know, and part of me didn't care. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. As the hours passed, I thought about what my life would look like without her. The thought of starting over was daunting, but not impossible. I still had my job, my friends, the parts of my life that she hadn't touched. I could rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. By the time the sun began to set, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not happiness, not relief, but something close to acceptance. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control what happened next. And that was enough for now. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the missed calls and texts. I hadn't responded to any of them yet, not even to my friends who had been checking in. I wasn't ready to talk, not yet. But as I stared at the screen, one message stood out from the rest, one from a close friend, Noah. I heard what happened. Call me when you're ready. I'm here for you, man. I smiled for the first time in what felt like days. I wasn't alone in this. Even though everything with Eliza had fallen apart, I still had people who cared about me, and who would help me get through this. And for the first time since I walked out of that hotel, I felt a spark of hope. I put the phone down and stood up, walking to the window. The night was settling in, dark and quiet, but I didn't feel afraid of it anymore. Tomorrow would come, and the day after that, and each one would get a little bit easier. I wasn't sure where the road would lead me, but I knew one thing for certain: I was moving on. And that, in itself, was enough. The first few days after leaving Eliza were surreal. It felt like I was drifting through my own life, disconnected from everything around me. Each morning, I woke up in an unfamiliar silence, the absence of her presence jarring. No sound of her footsteps in the kitchen, no soft hum of her voice as she made coffee. Just stillness. I tried to distract myself with work, throwing myself into every task, hoping that burying myself in emails and meetings would drown out the constant hum of my thoughts. But it wasn't that easy. Even at my desk, her face flashed before me, and her voice echoed in my mind, repeating the words she'd said in that hotel room. It was a mistake. I love you, Adam. But the truth was, her love wasn't enough. I knew that now. Noah called the day after I returned, just as I was leaving the office. The setting sun casting long shadows on the street. I stared at the phone for a moment, debating whether or not to answer. Part of me wasn't ready to talk about what had happened, but I knew Noah would understand. He always did. "Hey, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I answered. Adam, Noah's voice came through, full of concern. "I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up?" I hesitated, the weight of the last few days pressing down on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some moments, I feel like I'm okay, like I made the right decision. Other times, I don't even know how to feel." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear Noah thinking through what to say, and how to help. "It's gonna be like that for a while," he finally said. "You went through something huge, man. You can't expect to just snap out of it. It's gonna take time." "I know," I muttered, though the thought of dragging this pain around for who knows how long wasn't exactly comforting. Noah sighed as if he could hear the frustration in my voice. "Look, you know I'm here for you. Anytime. You don't have to go through this alone." "Thanks," I said, meaning it. "I appreciate it." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that: football, work, anything to distract me from the thoughts swirling in my head. But even as we talked, the weight of what had happened was still there, like a shadow I couldn't shake. When I hung up, I felt a little better, but the emptiness crept back in almost immediately. There was no escaping it. I had left Eliza behind, but the wound was still fresh, still bleeding. As the days passed, I started to settle into a new routine. I would wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. It was monotonous, but it was better than sitting in my own head, replaying every conversation, every lie. I tried to avoid thinking about her, but it was impossible. Every corner of the house reminded me of her, photos of us together, little things she had left behind. It felt like the ghost of our relationship was haunting me, refusing to let go. I spent most nights sitting on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching it, my mind elsewhere. The silence was deafening, but I didn't know how to fill it. I wasn't ready to go out, to pretend like everything was normal. I wasn't ready to tell everyone what had happened. But one thing was becoming clearer with each passing day: I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. Eventually, I would have to face the world again and start rebuilding my life from the ground up. I just didn't know where to begin. A week after leaving Eliza, I finally decided to start making changes. I couldn't live in our house anymore. The walls felt too close, filled with memories that weren't mine alone anymore. It had become a shrine to a relationship that no longer existed, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. Staying there was like living in a museum of the past, and I couldn't heal in that space. So I started looking for an apartment. Something small, somewhere to start over. It felt like the only way forward, to physically move on from the life we'd shared. I spent the next few days browsing listings online, going through the motions of apartment hunting like it was just another task on my to-do list. Each listing felt the same: 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, nice view of the city. None of it really mattered to me. I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it wasn't the house. Finally, after what felt like an endless search, I found a place that seemed right. It was a small 1-bedroom apartment, nothing fancy, but it was enough. It had a view of the city, high up enough that I could imagine starting fresh, looking out at the skyline, and forgetting the weight of everything behind me. I signed the lease without hesitation, eager to move in and leave the house behind. The day I packed up my things, I didn't take much. Just the essentials: clothes, a few personal items, my laptop. The rest I left behind. There was no point in taking reminders of the life I was walking away from. I didn't need the old photographs, the furniture we had picked out together. It all felt tainted now. As I packed the last of my things into the car, I took one final look at the house. It felt strange to leave it behind. It had been our home for years, filled with laughter, arguments, and quiet nights on the couch. Now it was just an empty shell, stripped of the life we had once shared. I drove to the new apartment with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me: relief, sadness, anger. But most of all, I felt a sense of finality. This was it. I was truly leaving Eliza behind. The apartment was quiet when I arrived, the kind of silence that felt both unfamiliar and oddly comforting. It was empty, but it was mine. There were no memories here, no ghosts of a broken marriage haunting the corners. It was a blank slate, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like something I could work with. I dropped my bags by the door and stood in the middle of the room, taking it all in. The light from the window streamed in, casting long shadows on the bare walls. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And right now, that was all I needed. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring up at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while: a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild from this. I wasn't healed. I wasn't over it. But I had taken the first step, and that was something. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I was walking in the right direction. And that, in itself, was progress. It didn't take long for word to spread that I had moved out of the house. Our friends, mutual friends, started to reach out more often, trying to check in, but it always felt awkward. Everyone had questions. Some were subtle, but others came right out with it: "What happened between you and Eliza?" For the most part, I kept my answers short and vague. There was no need to get into the messy details, not with people who would probably pass them right back to her. I didn't want the drama, I just wanted to move on. Noah was the only one who didn't push. He knew better than anyone what I was going through, and he gave me space to process it at my own pace. But after a couple of weeks, he started insisting we hang out again, and get back to something normal. "Let's hit up Phil's bar," he suggested one Friday afternoon, sending me a text just before I left work. "You need to get out of your own head." I stared at the message for a while, debating whether I was ready for it. Going to the bar meant seeing people, and pretending like I was okay when, deep down, I wasn't. But maybe Noah was right. Maybe I needed to get out and remind myself that life still existed outside of this mess. "Fine," I texted back. "I'll meet you there." When I arrived at the bar, Noah was already waiting, 2 beers in hand, a knowing smile on his face. The place was busy, buzzing with the kind of weekend energy I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. It was strange to be surrounded by so many people, all of them laughing, talking, oblivious to the emotional storm that had been in my life. I took the beer from him and sat down. "I'm here. What's the plan?" Noah grinned. "No plan. Just relax. Have a couple of drinks. Maybe actually talk to someone other than me for once." I chuckled. "Baby steps, man. I'm not sure I'm ready for that." But as the night went on, I found myself loosening up. The beer helped, sure, but it was more than that. It was the atmosphere, the noise, the normalcy of being out in the world again. For the first time since everything had happened, I wasn't consumed by thoughts of Eliza. I wasn't replaying the betrayal over and over in my head. I was just there, in the moment. We talked about anything and everything: sports, work, random memories from our college days. It felt good, like a part of me that had been buried was slowly resurfacing. By the time we ordered a second round, I almost felt like myself again. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her. She was sitting at the bar, a woman I didn't recognize but who instantly caught my attention. She had dark hair, tied back in a simple ponytail, and a quiet confidence about her. She wasn't flashy or trying to stand out, but something about her drew me in. Noah must have noticed me staring because he leaned over with a smirk. "See something you like?" I shot him a look. "It's not like that." "Uh-huh," he said, taking a sip of his beer. "Just saying. You've got options, Adam. Don't forget that." I shook my head, not ready to entertain the idea. The thought of starting something new, of getting involved with someone else after everything with Eliza, felt impossible. But as the night went on, I couldn't stop glancing over at her, wondering what her story was. Before I could think too much about it, Noah stood up, pulling me to my feet. "Come on," he said, dragging me toward the bar. "You need a refill, and maybe you should talk to someone who isn't me." I resisted at first, but eventually gave in, following him over to where she was sitting. Noah ordered another round, and as we waited, I found myself standing next to her, awkwardly trying to figure out what to say. "Hey," I finally managed, feeling ridiculous for even starting the conversation. "I'm Adam." She looked over at me, her eyes curious but not unkind. "Sarah," she replied, offering a small smile. We talked for a little while, nothing deep or life-changing, but enough to remind me that there was life beyond my failed marriage. She didn't ask about Eliza or the drama that had consumed me for weeks. It was just easy, a light conversation in a crowded bar. When Noah and I finally left, I felt lighter, like I had taken another step forward. Maybe I wasn't ready for something new yet, but I was starting to remember what it felt like to just live. And that was enough for now. A few days after the night at the bar, I ran into Eliza for the first time since moving out. It was at the grocery store of all places, the kind of mundane, everyday situation that I had never imagined would feel so charged with tension. I was in the produce section, minding my own business, when I saw her out of the corner of my eye. She was standing by the apples, her head tilted as she examined one like she wasn't sure if it was ripe enough. For a second, I thought about turning around and leaving, avoiding the awkwardness altogether. But it was too late. She saw me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. It felt like everything around us, the hum of people chatting, carts squeaking down aisles, faded into the background. All I could focus on was the look on her face, a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "Adam," she said, breaking the silence. "Eliza," I replied, nodding stiffly. She glanced around like she wasn't sure what to say next. I wasn't sure either. The last time we had spoken, I had walked out of the hotel room, leaving her behind with nothing more than a broken apology. Now here we were, standing in a grocery store like two strangers who had once known everything about each other. How have you been?" she asked, her voice careful, like she was afraid of pushing too far. I shrugged, not really wanting to get into it. "I've been all right." There was an awkward pause before she spoke again. "I heard you moved out of the house." "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I did." She nodded slowly, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. Regret, maybe? Or was it just sadness? Either way, I wasn't going to let myself get pulled back into her orbit. I had made my decision, and I needed to stick to it. "I've been thinking about you," she said quietly, almost like she didn't mean for me to hear it. I didn't respond right away. What was there to say? I had been thinking about her too, but not in the way she probably hoped. I had been thinking about the lies, the betrayal, the way she had broken something between us that couldn't be fixed. "I hope you're doing okay," I finally said, my voice stiff. It was the most neutral thing I could think of, a way to close the conversation without getting pulled into anything deeper. She gave me a sad smile. "Yeah, I'm trying." There was another awkward pause, and I could tell she wanted to say more, but I wasn't ready for that conversation. "Not here, not now. Maybe not ever." "I should go," I said, glancing at my cart as if I had somewhere urgent to be. "Take care, Eliza." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "You too, Adam." As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, anger. Running into her had been inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. Still, I was proud of myself for keeping it together, for not letting her drag me back into the past. I wasn't the same man who had stood in that hotel room, shattered and betrayed. I was stronger now, more certain of the path I was on. And no matter how hard it might be, I knew I couldn't let her derail my progress. I left the store that day feeling like I had crossed another hurdle, one more step away from the pain and toward something new. A few more weeks passed, and the hollow ache inside me started to dull. It wasn't gone, but it no longer dominated my every thought. I was adjusting to life without Eliza. The new apartment felt like mine now, even if it was bare and lacked the warmth of a shared home. My new routine, simple as it was, became comforting. Work, gym, dinner alone, maybe a late-night beer with Noah. I wasn't thriving, but I was surviving. It was on one of those gym nights that things began to spiral again. I had been avoiding the evening fitness classes since the day Eliza's fling with her trainer, Jason, had blown up in my face. The gym was my safe space, and the last thing I needed was another run-in with the reminder of everything that had gone wrong. But Noah was persistent. "Dude, you've gotta stop hiding from it. You can't avoid the gym just because of her. Take back that space," he said, nudging me as we stood by the lockers one evening. I shrugged. "I'm not hiding. I'm just choosing different hours." Right. You're avoiding it. Come on, man, just do one of the evening sessions. It'll feel good to push through it. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to face whatever awkwardness lay ahead. The thought of seeing Jason, of walking into a room full of people who may have heard whispers about Eliza and me, made my stomach turn. But I knew avoiding it wouldn't fix anything. That night, I finally decided to join the 7 p.m. workout class. As I walked into the gym, the familiar scent of sweat and rubber mats hit me. But there was something else in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. People were chatting, laughing, and stretching, but there were sideways glances, fleeting looks in my direction that I couldn't ignore. I could feel the whispers even if I couldn't hear them. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid, projecting my own insecurities onto the situation. But as I set down my water bottle and grabbed a set of weights, I heard someone behind me mutter something under their breath, followed by a stifled laugh. My grip tightened on the dumbbells. The class started, with Jason leading the warm-up with his usual overenthusiasm, and I did my best to focus on the workout. Squats, burpees, lunges, it all blurred together as I fought to push myself harder, to block out the stares, the whispers. But no matter how hard I worked, I could feel it, the eyes on me, judging me, pitying me. Halfway through the session, I noticed a group of women near the back, whispering and giggling amongst themselves. One of them caught my eye, a smirk playing on her lips before she quickly looked away. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped the weights with a loud clank and stormed out of the room, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and humiliation. I could feel the eyes on my back as I left, the whispers growing louder as I walked away. I should have known better. This was what came with a small community, a close-knit group of people who knew too much about each other's lives. Everyone had heard the story by now. The gossip had spread like wildfire. And now, I was no longer just Adam. I was the guy whose wife had cheated with the gym trainer. The guy who had been betrayed was humiliated. Outside, I leaned against the cold wall of the building, trying to catch my breath, my fists clenched at my sides. The anger burned hot inside me, but beneath it was something else, a deep, gnawing pain. I had come here to reclaim something, to take back control, but all I'd found was a fresh wound. I needed to get out of there. Away from the whispers. Away from the judgment. I texted Noah, telling him I was leaving, and then headed back to the apartment, my mind swirling with everything I'd just experienced. It wasn't fair. I hadn't asked for any of this, yet here I was, living in the aftermath of Eliza's choices. I was the one left to carry the shame, to bear the weight of her actions. But I wouldn't let this break me. The next day, I was still stewing over the incident at the gym. The humiliation, the whispers, Jason's smug face as he led the class, it all played on repeat in my mind, feeding a rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. I knew what I had to do. I needed to confront Jason. After work, I headed straight back to the gym, this time not for a workout, but for a conversation I had been avoiding for far too long. I walked in with purpose, my jaw set, my fists clenched. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't let this fester any longer. I needed to face him, to make it clear that I wasn't going to just disappear. That I wasn't going to let him get away with what he'd done. Jason was in the middle of training a client when I spotted him by the squat racks. He hadn't seen me yet, too focused on coaching the guy through his set. But as I approached, his eyes flicked up and met mine. His expression didn't change, but I saw a brief flicker of recognition, followed by a slight narrowing of his gaze. I waited until his client finished the set before stepping up, my voice steady but hard. "Jason, we need to talk." He glanced at me, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Now's not a great time, man. I'm working." "I don't care," I snapped, stepping closer. "This won't take long." The client looked between us, sensing the tension, and Jason waved him off with a quick, "Take 5, man." As soon as the guy walked away, Jason crossed his arms over his chest, looking at me with a smug expression that only fueled my anger. "What's this about, Adam? You know damn well what this is about." I growled, keeping my voice low but fierce. "You slept with my wife." He didn't deny it, didn't flinch. He just looked at me with that same infuriating calm. "Look, man, what happened between me and Eliza?" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Don't try to explain it. Don't give me some bullshit excuse about how it just happened. You knew she was married, and you didn't care. You didn't give a damn about what it would do to me." Jason shrugged, his face unreadable. "I didn't force her to do anything. Adam, She made her own choices. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to take a swing at him right there in the middle of the gym. You think that excuses what you did? You think that makes it okay? He raised an eyebrow, his tone cold. I'm not saying it was right. But it wasn't all on me, either. I stared at him, my chest heaving with the effort to keep my temper in check. Every word out of his mouth felt like another punch to the gut, but I wasn't going to let him get the last word. You might not care, I said, my voice tight, but this isn't over. You're not going to just walk away from this like nothing happened. I'm not disappearing, and you're not going to keep acting like you own this place. Jason didn't respond right away, but I could see something shift in his expression, maybe a hint of unease, or maybe just annoyance at the fact that I wasn't backing down. Do what you gotta do, he finally said, his voice cold. I didn't bother replying. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, the tension in my chest still thick. But as I left the gym, a strange sense of relief settled over me. I had faced him. I had made it clear that I wasn't going to let him, or anyone else, define me by what had happened. It was another step forward, another small victory in a battle that wasn't over yet. The confrontation with Jason had felt like a release, like a valve had been turned, letting out weeks of built-up frustration. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't naive enough to think that a single conversation with the guy who had blown my life apart would fix anything. It barely scratched the surface. I needed something more, something that would allow me to take control of the situation. To make sure that everyone, especially Eliza, understood the full weight of what had happened. The anger still burned inside me, but it had started to sharpen into something more focused, more deliberate. That's when the idea took root. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic Hollywood sense. I wasn't out to hurt anyone physically. But I wanted the truth to come out, for everyone to know what had happened without me having to spell it out. And Jason? Well, he had made himself look like the king of the gym. Maybe it was time for that image to shatter. It all started coming together that weekend when Noah and I grabbed drinks at a small pub. I was quieter than usual, sipping my beer in silence while Noah rambled about work and his latest date. Finally, he paused and gave me a look. All right, what's going on with you? You've got that look. I stared into my glass, debating whether to say anything. Noah had been there for me through all of this, but I wasn't sure how he'd react to what I was about to suggest. After a moment, I decided to lay it all out. I'm going to expose them, I said, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. Noah raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. Expose them? What do you mean? I said slowly, I'm done keeping quiet about it. I'm done letting everyone whisper behind my back and act like I'm the one who's broken. Jason and Eliza? They're the ones who should feel the weight of what they did, not me. And I've got a plan. Noah's eyes narrowed. What kind of plan? I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. I'm going to make sure everyone at the gym knows exactly who Jason really is. But I'm not just going to tell them. I'm going to show them. Noah looked at me, skeptical but intrigued. And how do you plan on doing that? That gym is Jason's domain. He's the big shot, the guy everyone looks up to. I'm going to take that away from him. I'm going to make sure everyone sees him for what he really is, an arrogant, selfish asshole who sleeps with married women. I paused, watching Noah for his reaction. To my surprise, he didn't immediately shoot the idea down. Instead, he leaned forward, curiosity in his eyes. All right, I'm listening. How exactly are you planning to pull this off? I leaned in too, lowering my voice as the details of the plan began to form in my mind. You remember how Jason always does that big outdoor fitness event every summer? The one where the whole gym gets involved. Noah nodded. Yeah, the charity thing. It's a big deal. Half the town shows up. Exactly, I said. That event is his pride and joy. He's the star of the show, everyone watching him, following his lead. But this year, I'm going to be the one in control. Noah frowned, not quite following. How? I've been talking to a few people at the gym, feeling things out. There are more people than you think who've heard the rumors, who know something went down between Jason and Eliza. They've just been too afraid to say anything because Jason has so much influence there. But if I can rally a few of them, plant the seeds, we can turn the event into something more revealing. Noah's eyes widened. Wait, are you saying you want to publicly humiliate him? At the event? I shrugged. Not outright. I don't want to make a scene or anything. But I want people to know the truth. I'm going to make sure the rumors spread so that by the time the event rolls around, everyone's already whispering about Jason. Then, during the event, when everyone's watching, I'm going to make sure he gets exposed. Maybe a few of the trainers will slip up and mention the affair. Maybe someone accidentally leaks it to the crowd. By the end of it, Jason won't be the golden boy anymore. He'll be just another guy who ruined someone's marriage. Noah stared at me for a long moment, processing. Finally, he let out a low whistle. That's intense. But are you sure you want to go through with this? I mean, it could backfire. You could end up looking petty. I've thought about that, I admitted. But I'm not doing this out of pettiness. I'm doing this because I'm tired of letting them control the narrative. Jason and Eliza have been living their lives like nothing happened, and I've been the one paying the price. It's time to even the score. Noah was quiet for a while, then finally nodded. All right, man, if this is what you want to do, I'm with you. Just be careful, okay? Don't let this consume you. I gave him a tight smile. Don't worry, I've got it under control. As we left the bar that night, the plan solidified in my mind. It was risky, sure, but I was willing to take that risk. I had stayed silent long enough, letting them get away with it. But not anymore. The truth was going to come out, and when it did, Jason's perfect image would crumble. It was time to make sure everyone knew the real story. The day of the gym's big charity event arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. People from all over town had shown up, ready for a day of workouts, competitions, and camaraderie. The event was a staple in the community, and Jason was, as usual, at the center of it all. He strutted around the outdoor field like a king, shaking hands, slapping backs, and flashing his charming smile at anyone who would look. But today was different. Today, the whispers had started even before the first stretch. Noah and I had done our part in the days leading up to the event, quietly planting seeds with key people in the gym, people who were already suspicious or had overheard fragments of the story. Little by little, the rumors had spread like wildfire. It didn't take much, a knowing glance here, a murmured comment there, and soon enough, the undercurrent of gossip was rippling through the crowd. I could feel it as I stood near the back, watching the event unfold. People were talking, their voices hushed but filled with curiosity. With judgment. Every now and then, someone would glance over at Jason, their expression shifting from admiration to something else, something colder. He hadn't noticed yet. He was too busy soaking in the attention, leading the warm-up with his usual enthusiasm. But the shift in the crowd was palpable. As the event progressed, Jason moved from station to station, coaching participants through obstacle courses and team exercises. His voice boomed through the microphone, guiding everyone with the authority of a man who believed he was untouchable. But that belief was about to be shattered. About halfway through the event, during one of the bigger group workouts, I saw my opportunity. The crowd was gathered around a large field where Jason was leading a high-intensity circuit. People were pushing themselves to their limits, sweat pouring down their faces, but the murmurs hadn't stopped. In fact, they were growing louder. I caught Noah's eye from across the field, and he nodded. We had set this in motion, and now it was time to let it play out. As Jason barked out instructions, one of the trainers, a guy named Ryan, who had been particularly vocal about not liking Jason's ego, stepped forward. He had a look on his face that told me he was ready to take the plunge. Hey, Jason, Ryan called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Why don't you tell everyone how you keep yourself in such great shape? Jason, still clueless, flashed a grin. It's all about discipline, man. Hard work, day in and day out. Ryan smirked, glancing around at the crowd. Yeah? That what you told Adam's wife, too? The words hit like a bomb. For a split second, there was silence. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone is collectively holding their breath. Then, the whispers exploded into full-blown chatter. Jason froze, his confident smile faltering as he realized what had just been said. His eyes darted around, searching for some kind of escape, but there was none. The crowd was watching him, some with shock, others with smug satisfaction. And a few with outright disgust. My heart was racing. This was it. The moment everything came crashing down. Jason tried to recover, his voice strained as he spoke into the microphone. All right, let's stay focused here, people. Let's get back to the workout. But the damage had been done. The crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. They were too busy exchanging looks, murmuring about what they had just heard. Ryan wasn't done. Come on, man, you've been acting like you're king of the gym. But everyone knows what you did. Do you think people don't talk? You think we didn't notice how close you were getting to Eliza? Jason's face darkened, his hands gripping the microphone tightly. That's enough, Ryan. We're here for a charity event, not to gossip. But the crowd wasn't going to let it go. Someone else in the back shouted, Is it true, Jason? You and Adam's wife? More voices chimed in, each question sharper than the last. Jason's perfect image was crumbling right in front of him. Piece by piece. I stood there, watching it all unfold. I didn't need to say anything. The truth had a way of surfacing on its own once the cracks were exposed. And now, those cracks were wide open for everyone to see. Jason was flustered, trying to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. People were walking away, some shaking their heads, others muttering angrily. His reputation, the thing he had worked so hard to build, was unraveling in real time. I didn't feel triumphant. It wasn't the kind of victory that made you want to celebrate. But it was a resolution. A reckoning. Jason had taken something from me, and now, I had taken something from him. As the crowd began to disperse, Jason stood alone in the middle of the field, the microphone hanging limply at his side. His head was down, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions finally catching up to him. Noah walked over to me, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Well, that was something. I nodded, my gaze still fixed on Jason. Yeah, it was. We left the event together, the whispers of the crowd fading behind us. I didn't know what would happen next, how the gym would respond, how Eliza would react when she heard about what had happened. But I knew one thing for certain. The truth was out, and now, it was time to move on.